Today, Mark Carney is set to become Canada's Prime Minister after the Liberal Party secures a fourth consecutive federal election.
But it's not the resounding majority win he hoped for to stand up to Trump. The Pentagon's silence over claims of civilian casualties during strikes on the Houthis in Yemen.
And Trump ramps up deportation plans as he nears 100 days in office.
It's Tuesday, April 29th. This is Reuters World News, bringing you everything you need to know from the front lines in 10 minutes every weekday. I'm Tara Oakes in Liverpool.
And I'm Christopher Walljasper in Chicago.
America wants our land, our resources, our water, our country.
Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, wins a new term on an anti-Trump platform.
We are over the shock of the American betrayal, but we should never forget the lessons.
His opposition rival, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who has drawn comparisons with US President Donald Trump, appears on course to lose his seat as we record this show. But Carney's win falls short of the majority government he had wanted to take on Trump. David Youngren, on the ground in Canada, has more. David, will Carney be able to maintain this anti-Trump rhetoric now he's been elected?
Well, he has no choice because he campaigned on being tough with Trump. And in fact, in his victory speech, he repeated most of the lines that he'd given during the campaign. So having campaigned really only on one topic, to be frank, dealing with Trump, he is now going to have to deal with Trump. But the challenge is that this is not what the Liberals were banking on. Even in the hours before the vote, we were getting very confident predictions that Carney would, in fact, have a very strong majority and would be able to do what he wants with Trump. But it's clear that the Liberal backroom staff badly misread the dynamic in Canada. The opposition Conservative Party actually made the most gains. Mr. Carney has some alliance building to do in the next few days, I think.
So how will that work?
He called for a strong mandate to deal with Trump. But his challenge is he doesn't control a majority of seats, so he is going to have to work with opposition leaders almost on a vote-by-vote basis to deal with Trump. In his victory speech, Mr. Carney said he would be sitting down with President Trump to hold talks in a future economic and security relationship. But you can see a scenario whereby the US president would just wait and see what happens, because it's quite possible that the Canadian government won't last that long.
Estoy en silla de ruedas con oxígeno y bueno, dependo de la electricidad.
72-year-old Jose Maria Casais saying during a massive blackout in Spain that he depends on electricity for his oxygen machine. Power has started returning to parts of Spain and Portugal after Monday's outage brought both countries to a standstill. The cause of the outage remains unclear.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says the world doesn't want to wait until May 8th for Russia's proposed 72-hour ceasefire. In his nightly address, the leader called for a full and unconditional ceasefire for at least 30 days to provide a, quote, basis for real diplomacy.
There's a date to start the election process of a new pope, according to a Vatican source. Roman Catholic cardinals will meet in a secret conclave starting on May 7th.
In Gaza, a significant breakthrough in negotiations on a ceasefire, according to two Reuters sources. They say some sticking points remain, including Hamas laying down arms.
India has shut down more than half of the tourist spots in Kashmir starting from today. It's part of the government's moves to tighten security after last week's deadly attack. And the Trump administration is looking into whether Harvard's law review violated civil rights laws when editors fast-tracked an article written by a member of a racial minority. News of the probe came hours after a federal judge agreed to fast-track the university's lawsuit, seeking to block the government from freezing its $2.3 billion in federal funding. President Trump is expected to soften the impact of his car tariffs today after appeals from automakers for relief. Carmel Crimmins has more.
This shift comes as Trump prepares to travel today to Michigan, the heart of the American automobile industry, to mark 100 days in office. He's going to lift some tariffs on foreign parts used in cars and trucks made inside the US, and imported cars will also be given a reprieve from tariffs on aluminum and steel. It's the latest move by Trump to roll back parts of his trade policies after market upheaval and growing dissatisfaction with how he's handling the economy. A recent Reuters Ipsos poll showed just 37% of respondents approve of Trump's handling of the economy, down from 42% just after his inauguration.
One of the deadliest US strikes so far in a campaign against the Houthis in Yemen. Corpses covered in dust and debris scattered in the wreckage of a detention centre for African migrants. Survivors say they were awakened by the blast, which Houthi-run TV says killed 68.
Reporter Idris Ali is at the Pentagon and is looking into the attacks.
President Trump came into office and he has really intensified these strikes against the Houthis. And again, the rationale is that they are posing a threat to international shipping, but that they're also carrying out strikes or attempted strikes against U.S. military ships in the region.
So what has the U.S. said about the Houthis' claims of civilian casualties?
The Houthis do come out with statements and numbers after almost each strike, especially those in heavily populated areas. But the U.S. military has just been quite silent. They say that they are aware of reports. They say they are investigating those reports. But it's something that usually takes quite a bit of time to actually be able to corroborate how many people have been killed. But by any standards, I think I've covered the Pentagon for nearly a decade. The silence and the lack of information when it comes to operations is pretty remarkable.
So what does the situation look like going forward?
I think the Trump administration will at some point have to come to a fork in the road saying, do we keep these U.S. military assets in the region? Do we spend the hundreds of millions, potentially billions of dollars that, are required to carry out strikes in Yemen? Or do we focus on what we said is important for us in the U.S. military, which is countering China, looking at the Indo-Pacific more as a focus?
On Monday, U.S. President Donald Trump signed an executive order promising to withhold funding from cities and states that don't cooperate with his immigration crackdown. Trump's focus on immigration ahead of the marking of his first 100 days in office is no coincidence, as our immigration reporter Ted Hessen reports.
What we've seen so far is a really dramatic drop in the number of migrants illegally crossing the border. In March, 7,200 immigrants were caught crossing illegally, and that was the lowest monthly level on record, which is going back to 2000. And it really showed a dramatic drop-off. The peak was actually 250,000 migrants caught crossing in December 2023. We've also seen around the country, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, has ramped up its arrest of immigrants who are here without lawful status. That includes both people with criminal convictions, but also many people who have no criminal convictions. President Trump has said he wants to deport millions of people here illegally, but so far they've deported in 3 months about 130,000 people, according to the Trump administration statistics. When you compare that to Biden last year, it's actually somewhat lower. During the same period last year, Biden had about 195,000 deportations. And part of the reason is there were just many more people crossing the border illegally.
So how is the Trump administration responding to criticism of its deportation tactics?
Trump has framed this around the rule of law and saying that under Biden, that millions of people were entering the country who shouldn't have, and that now action needs to be taken. And his officials have really stood by this crackdown and said that it needs to happen, and people are thinking twice before crossing illegally into the U.S. and realizing what the consequences may be.
So we've seen this big push on immigration starting this week. The Trump administration even displayed signs on the White House lawn depicting alleged criminal migrants. Why is the administration highlighting all this now?
I think the White House looks at immigration and they think of this as an area where they've delivered. And I think when you look at Trump's approval rating, it's his strongest issue. So I think there'll be a real desire to increase funding for detention or expand it, and then also just ramping up the actual removals.
And for today's recommended read, a graphic on how the Super Shia quake tore through Myanmar, with data showing why last month's earthquake was so devastating. We'll include links in the pod description to both the graphic story and our special episode, which takes a look at the quake's impact on Myanmar's political future.
For more on any of the stories from today, check out Reuters.com or the Reuters app. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast player. We'll be back tomorrow with our daily headline show.